Over the last few weeks, we've been hearing a lot about due process and immigration. But what does that really mean, and what rights do immigrants have under our Constitution? This video will explain the basics. First, let's start with the Constitution itself. The Fifth Amendment to the Constitution says quite clearly that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without the due process of laws. Note that this says person, not citizen, and over the years the Supreme Court has consistently ruled that the Due Process Clause applies to all people in the United States. Of course, what process somebody gets before their liberty may be deprived is going to depend on the individual circumstances. But there is no question that the due process right does apply even to people who are in the country in violation of immigration laws. As the Supreme Court itself ruled in 1993, quote, "It is well established that the Fifth Amendment entitles non-citizens to due process of law in removal proceedings." So what are removal proceedings and how do they satisfy due process? Well, the most important thing to understand about due process is that it entitles a person at the very basic to notice of the charges being brought against them and an opportunity to be heard. So that means if the government accuses somebody of being in the country without permission, then that person has to be given notice that the government believes that and an opportunity to be heard. In immigration court, there are also additional rights that have been put down in law. For example, every person in immigration court has a right to hire a lawyer to defend themselves. They also have a right to present evidence, to rebut whatever claims the government is making, and to file certain applications that could lead to them not being deported and being allowed to stay in the United States. Those applications include things like asylum, withholding of removal, cancellation of removal, or various kinds of waivers that might permit them to remain in the United States illegally, even if they are previously in the country without permission. We are seeing right now the importance of due process when it comes to President Trump's actions to carry out the so-called Alien Enemies Act, a 1798 wartime law that permits people to be deported outside of the normal framework of immigration law. President Trump has alleged that this law allows him to simply point at any person, declare them to be an alien enemy, and kick them out of the country without ever having a chance to see a judge. Thankfully, the Supreme Court said that is not true, and in a unanimous decision ruled that people can challenge the Trump administration's invocation of the Alien Enemies Act in court. Through habeas corpus lawsuits, they can challenge not only whether the law is properly applied to them, that is, whether they are members of the gang Tren de Aragua, but also whether or not the president's invocation of the law was legal. And we are seeing already why this right to due process is so important. A recent court decision in El Paso became the first judicial decision to rule that Trump's invocation of the law as to two people was wrong. The Trump administration argued that a husband and wife were members of the gang Tren de Aragua and therefore subject to the Alien Enemies Act. But when that evidence was presented in court, the federal judge ruled that there simply wasn't any there, that the evidence the government presented did not prove at all that these people were actually members of the gang. In fact, it was based purely on hearsay and supposition and evidence, and there was not anywhere near enough evidence to prove that these people were part of the gang. Without due process, those individuals could have been sent to El Salvador and imprisoned, potentially for life. With due process, they had a chance to go in front of a judge. They had notice that they were going to be subject to this law and an opportunity to challenge the decision. And when they did make that challenge, they won. That is why due process is so important, because it means that no person can be rounded up and sent to another country without a chance to go to court and make the government prove their case. Due process protects all of us from government abuses, and it's something that every American should support. An immigration court